A combative debate last night in Philadelphia between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. To help us process the debate's takeaways, we're joined by Sean Frieder, Assistant Professor of Political Science and Public Administration at the University of North Florida. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you, Sean. What is your personal headline from last night's debate?
I think you could summarize it as Harris gets under Trump's skin. That was her strategy, and I think it seems like she pulled that off.
So thank you for coming in early. You had to stay up late to watch this debate. It seems that Republicans this morning and kind of last night chewing over what happened were in somewhat agreement that Donald Trump did not perform as well as Kamala Harris. What points did he score? Where did he succeed in that hour and a half debate?
When he was able to stay on message discipline, he was able to probably score some points against her. If you look at where independents have been and swing voters who aren't decided on yet how they're going to vote in the election, they've been saying things like they're not sure if Harris has the policy chops and has her own plans enough developed to get their vote. He was able to point out some flip flops. He was able to talk about, try and tie her record to Biden's record. And, they are working closely together. So he really clearly wants to be running against Biden rather than her. That came up multiple times in the debate. When he was able to stay on message, it's clear that that's how he was prompted by his debate team preparing him. Stay on message about policy. She was able to frequently knock him off that message, though.
What kind of missed opportunities did you see in terms of messaging that he could have brought more effectively? Likely things that his team had been trying to get him to focus on.
Really nailing her to policy. She was able to, I think, seem like someone who's talking about policy well. You could listen to her policies, you could agree or disagree with the policies, but if you came in worried that she was not a serious person with some ideas, she did present them. Now, of course, in a debate, you're not going to be able to present very strong ideas or very complex ideas because you have very limited time to talk. So, he could have tried to make hay of that. He could have tried to poke holes and she's not offering enough details. And he does do that somewhat throughout the debate, but he gets sidetracked a lot. And part of it is that he spends most of his time when he talks about issues on immigration. This is something that actually sometimes helped him, a lot of the time hurt him. I think he was strongest when he was talking about the economy, and she kept veering him off of that.
And when you say it hurt him, at what point did you see that hurt him?
I think you could see it sometimes on his face, and I think that this is something important to understand for the debate audience is, if you're undecided, especially, policy details are very complicated. There's a lot of things flying around. It's super hard to keep track of who's saying what. It's hard to evaluate those plans. So that means that people watching often default to things like body language. And you saw very clear body language differences between Trump and Harris. Trump was staring straight forward most of the time, pursing his lips, and she was actively looking at him the whole time. So there was a little bit more of a sense that she was going after him actively, and you could see that in his face. There were certain words she used that she was probably trained to use by her debate preppers, like weak and being laughed at, and things that, would get under his skin, talking about crowd sizes. And every single time she would say something like that, you'd see him visibly wince. And when he had time to respond, he had an opportunity to go after substance, and instead he would defend things like crowd sizes, his intelligence, etc.
Yeah, and so you think that was a strategy that she was prepped for, specifically needling the president or trying to bait him into responding to things that might appeal to his ego?
I think so. I think, you try and come in with a singular message that you try and say about your own campaign. You try and have a singular message you say about the other campaign. And for Harris, I think the obvious move, and this has been the case for most of his opponents, is to make this a debate about character, not necessarily about policy. And so knowing that you can get under his skin with certain things that he cares about and most of the rest of the audience doesn't necessarily care about, that's a sure way to be able to knock him off his game. And I think, she was prepped to repeatedly do that. Every single time she tried it, it seemed to work to me.
We're talking about last night's debate, and a little bit we're going to be talking to the new head of Florida's ACLU. We're also taking your calls and questions. You can reach us at 904-549-2937, or you can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. We have a call from our friend Stanley on the north side. Good morning, Stanley.
Yes, good morning. Good morning. Yes, especially to you. I am impressed by the VP, Miss Harris. She did a fantastic job, and she represented the country very well. I disagree with the guest here on quite a few things. Trump messed up himself. His track record speaks for itself. Why we are not talking about his track record? He have destroyed this country here. I'm talking about as far as bringing us together. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley. There was a lot of discussion last night in the debate about, the legacy of Donald Trump. He said, that things have kind of gone to hell in a handbasket since he left office in the last 3.5 years. She talked about him, tearing at the fabric of the nation in terms of, the way that that his policies have impacted the people of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, this is a debate that we've seemingly gone back and forth on a lot. When this was Biden versus Trump, we had conversations of how do we bring the country back together? How do we create unity? It's really difficult to create unity in a country that's this polarized. And, I think she was trying to show not just that this was about his character, but also this was about her character. That she had her policy ideas, but at the same time, if you're looking for someone with a message to move forward, a message of hope, this is someone that you'd vote for rather than him. And she was trying to, magnify his anger. And for what it's worth, I agree with what your caller said. It's sort of his record that really there should be a referendum on. It's very difficult to pin him down to that record. Trump has been very successful in the last 8 years in trying to make things about other people. And I think that, you need some active work to make that back about him. And so getting under his skin is a way to do that.
They did try a couple of times to ask him if he would have done anything differently on January 6th, and that was a question that he didn't answer.
Yeah, there were multiple moments where they tried to get him to just pin down on simple yes and no questions. Your actions on January 6th. Do you want Ukraine to win this war? How are you with European allies? And even on foreign policy, there were some pretty shocking responses from him. Asked about allies, he spent a lot of time talking about Viktor Orban, of all people. And, you'd think you'd talk about our real allies in the UK, France, Germany, all of our typical strong ally countries. And he talked about the one that has something closest to a Putin-like dictator in it.
So these debates, often the narrative is shaped, in the hours after. How do you think it is being parlayed? I mean, a lot of people don't watch these debates, and the information that they get is ultimately through the lens of other reporters or social media. How do you think it's coalescing?
Yeah, I think that's an extremely important point. As you say, the people watching the debate are usually already people that have chosen a team and they're watching as a bit of a sporting match. There's some undecided voters watching, but if there's undecided voters out there, there's many more people that will wake up the next day. They'll listen to shows like this, they'll read the headlines. And so, in order for a debate to really have a long term impact, we see in political science research, most debates don't actually impact the outcome of the election very much. In order to do that, you have to have a clear differential. The headlines the next day have to read one candidate clearly won, the other one clearly lost. And I think you can see from some of the spin alley stuff that happened after the debate, if you have Republicans kind of begrudgingly talking about Trump being off message, you are sending a pretty clear signal that you think your side didn't do that well. We look at flash polls of undecided voters watching the day after, and I think it was 67% saying that Harris was the winner of that debate, and that was actually a group that was more Republican than Democrat. So that shows that amongst undecided voters, even for people that ostensibly would be more likely to vote for Trump, he seems to have put himself at a disadvantage last night.
So there was a news that came after this debate last night of this endorsement from Taylor Swift. Obviously, that's outside the scope of the debate, but how do you think that's going to play into the residue of this debate itself, kind of taken as a whole? Her relatively, competent performance, followed by what is a pretty big endorsement, at least among young people.
Yeah, it's a 1-2 punch. I mean, this is clearly not the case that Taylor Swift was watching the debate and then impromptu decided to endorse Harris. She had a statement prepared. This was ready to launch right after the debate. I think especially if it was a successful debate for Harris, which it was. Listeners may or may not be happy to hear this, but I actually think, the debate probably has less of an effect than a Taylor Swift endorsement. We're talking about this is going to be interesting and important to young people, to young women in particular. And these are groups that turn out in relatively low numbers compared to older people. And these are groups that vote overwhelmingly for Democratic candidates. So if Taylor Swift is able to actually get even a slight change in voter turnout amongst the youth, that could be a decisive factor in states that are very close.
So within hours, Kamala Harris was saying she's ready for another debate. Trump sort of maybe coolly accepting or perhaps not. Do you expect that there will be another debate, or is this it?
This could be it. I think it's really dangerous for a presidential candidate to turn down the offer for another debate. You don't want to be seen as weak, ducking out. If he were to be turning down a second debate, I think it would be spun from his side as it's impossible for us to get fair debate moderators. But I think that a lot of the public watching would see someone that, they're used to watching 3 or 4 debates during election season. It's already unusual that we're maybe just having the one. Given an opportunity to say yes to a second one, I think he should, but I don't necessarily know that he will.
Well, Sean Frieder, thanks so much for coming on the program for the hard turn overnight. We appreciate you being here and telling us about the debate.
Thanks again for having me.